Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 100 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. And I am so glad to be back behind the microphone today. The podcast has actually been on hiatus for a couple of months now, as I've been juggling a number of other things here. But what a great time to come back with episode 100. And, I feel like it's time to reflect a little bit. I started the podcast back in November of 2018, and I chose November because November is always Children's Grief Awareness Month. So speaking of that, be on the lookout for Children's Grief Awareness Month coming up this year and some special giveaways I have planned for that. But in the meantime, I'd like to share with you why I decided to start this podcast. And to do that, I thought that I would read a short excerpt from my new book, which is called Future Widow: Losing My Husband, Saving My Family, and Finding My Voice. And so this is from part 3 of the book. So actually, part 1 and part 2 go through the times when he was ill and the things that I have learned since about children's grief and weaving in a lot of that information into the memoir aspects. But part 3 goes on after he died. Then what? Then what's next? What's next for me? How do I put some kind of life back together? So this is on page 243, and I'll just read a little bit here because it's about me starting the podcast. So here we go. In the weeks and months following Dennis's death, I was paralyzed by the lack of a roadmap, something that would show me how to do this thing called widowed parenting. It was a job I didn't sign up for, but one I now had nonetheless. And then I realized I couldn't be the only widowed parent feeling like this. With that epiphany, my desire shifted. No longer was my agenda just about seeking answers to help my family survive. Perhaps I thought I could seek out and interview people who could begin putting into place the various pieces of this puzzle. Perhaps I could even deliver these lessons to other widowed parents. And maybe, just maybe, I could do that in the form of a podcast. Soon I became passionate about the prospect of creating something to help others who were struggling too. I could use my background in technology, even though none of it was directly related to podcasting, to fill a gap that I saw in the world. And so then I want to jump ahead actually to page 249, which is the start of the next chapter. This chapter is called Finding My Voice. I got to work setting all the necessary balls in motion to start a podcast. I made a list of potential guests. I got cover art for listing my program in podcast directories, studied the formats of shows that I liked, learned how to edit audio files, hired a voiceover guide to make the intro and the outro. Finally, the day arrived, my very first podcast interview. I'd been hoping to interview a friend of mine first. As it turns out, I have several neighbors who are widowed parents, including my across-the-street neighbor who had been widowed for over a decade at that point. She was kind enough to agree to an interview back when the podcast was still just an idea, and I really wanted to dip my toe into the waters by speaking with her first. I figured that if everything was a disaster with this first interview, the sound quality was terrible, I failed to lead a compelling discussion, or I forgot to hit record, for example, I could probably lean on her to do it all over again. Instead, I dove off the deep end. By happenstance of how the schedule came together, my very first interview was with a complete stranger. Someone I had been following on Instagram and reached out to when I was trying to line up guests for the first few episodes. And I was nervous. You see, I'd never interviewed anyone before. Literally never. So I did what any resourceful person with access to a computer would do. I thought to myself, who is the best interviewer I can think of? And then I Googled, how to interview like Terry Gross. Armed with my new insights as to how the host of National Public Radio's Fresh Air approaches her work, and a way too long list of questions for my guest, I started the interview. Soon we were engrossed in conversation. I looked at the clock after a while and I realized that I had absolutely no idea whether we'd been talking for 20 minutes or an hour and 20. I finally hit the stop button on the recording. And at that very moment, I was overcome with the sense of liberation that comes from finally seeing the value of your life and of your work. In that moment, I knew there would be no turning back. There would be no turning back. Absolutely. And now here we are. It's 2021, so it's approaching 3 years in and 100 episodes as of today. So for today's episode, I'm very excited to be kicking off a special series. It's a 4-part series, and this week's is Best of Show Part 1, Conversations with Widowed Parents. So I've been going back and listening to old clips, and longtime listeners will know that I always ask some variation of this question at the end of the show. If you could say one thing to widowed parents, what would it be? And I thought this would be the perfect question to cover for this special episode, because I hear so often from widowed parents that they feel lost and alone, and maybe they don't know anyone else in their situation, in their neighborhood, or in their kids' school community. So today I wanted to bring you guys messages from some of the widowed parents that I've interviewed on the show. These are seasoned widowed parents, people who are down the path a bit, and they have some reflections to share with all of us. And so I've considered all 100 episodes to date, and I've pulled clips from 11 of my guests for today's show. I hope you enjoyed this special episode, Best of Show Part 1, Conversations with Widowed Parents. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. Okay, so let's kick off this episode with Melissa Gould. And Melissa is the author of Widowish, a memoir. And I interviewed Melissa back in episode 94, so check that out. And I wanted to start with this today because the tip Melissa shares is something that I hear a lot from people. People feel that they're grieving wrong, that there's something wrong with them, or they're doing something wrong, or they don't know the right way to grieve. So have a listen to what Melissa shares with us. I feel like I could keep asking you questions all day here, but I do think we probably should wrap it up. So I'll just ask one last question then. I'd like to ask all my listeners, if you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
I could give you a really long answer to that.
Sure, whatever you like.
I feel like, becoming widowed in midlife is so unsettling and so traumatic. And I think it's so important that people relieve themselves of any expectations of how they should be grieving. I think you probably hear this a lot, but there's no right way to grieve, just as there is no wrong way. For example, my daughter slept in my bed. She was 13, and she started sleeping with me when Joel was in the hospital. And she stayed sleeping with me in my room pretty much the entire first year. Mm-hmm. And it never occurred to me that that was weird or wrong or shouldn't be happening. I think she needed the comfort. She was an only child. There were no other kids for her to share in that. Just as I was kind of looking for my peer group as a 13-year-old girl, she couldn't find people who related to her either, which is also why I think when I did finally meet Allison and my daughter got together with her daughters, it was great. But I guess my point is that there's just no right or wrong way. And I hear people are always like thinking they're doing it wrong. And that's an impossibility. You can't you're going to feel the way you feel. And again, it's a traumatic thing. And I always just encourage people to feel what they're feeling, because that's the only way through it. And one of the things I talk about in the book is, feeling lost in a place that is completely familiar. And it's almost like learning this new language of grief. Like I couldn't fathom that I was living in the same house, driving the same car. My daughter was going to the same school. but Joel wasn't here anymore. Like it seemed like I was in this alternate universe, this alternate reality, and it was so unsettling and discombobulating. But eventually the world becomes familiar again. And I just think time is really a miraculous healer. And that's what I would say to other people and your listeners is you got to give yourself the time.
Okay, next up we have Tembi Luck, and I interviewed Tembi in episode 32, and Tembi's the author of the memoir From Scratch. It is a cross-cultural love story. If you like Italy, if you like food, if you're interested in a really inspiring and moving memoir, check out Tembi's book From Scratch, and also keep an eye out. Right now, I believe they're working on the movie adaptation of the book. I don't know when that is coming out, but keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, here's Tembi. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
Oh, gosh. Take it easy. Allow time for rest when you can find it. And please be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
Just be gentle. Just be gentle.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
It is. Yeah.
You're not making it up. You're not making it up. It's hard work.
Okay, next up we have Karen Paul. I interviewed Karen in episode 96. Terrific discussion. Have a listen. Turns out that Karen's husband, like mine, died of glioblastoma, and our husbands were sick right around the same time. It was so interesting to compare stories and hear that we were going through such similar things at the same time. Anyway, we had a terrific discussion. Be sure and go look up episode 96. Karen talks about the acts of defiance that she embraced in her first year of widowhood, including memorial tattoos and getting a dog and all kinds of other things. But do have a listen, and here in this question you get to hear me asking. I ask each guest at the end of each show if they could share one thing with newly widowed parents, what would they say? So have a listen to Karen Paul. I'll ask one more question. I like to ask all my guests on the show, if you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
I would say take a deep breath and know that what your life looks like today is not what your life is going to look like in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years. And it's really, really hard to see that, especially when you're in the very new throes of loss and grief. But your life continues. And especially for parents, I mean, I really do think that spending time thinking about how to help my children helped me as well. And so that very intensive focus on taking care of ourselves, taking care of our families, one step at a time, but also knowing that down the road it is going to feel better, and it is, you know, our lives do continue. And so that's what I've learned.
Okay, up next we have Will Owens. I interviewed Will in episode 18, and one of the things that I love about this show, the Widowed Parent Podcast, is it is for widowed dads and widowed moms, both. There's so much that we have in common and so much information that we all need, resources that we can all be helped by. And I like to try to make everything applicable to both moms and dads. I also like to do some episodes specifically for dads and interviewing other widowed dads or other people with expertise on that topic. So I had such a great discussion with Will Owens. Do have a listen to our full discussion in episode 18 because he has lots and lots of tips, especially for dads of younger kids or newly widowed dads. And in this clip you'll hear he mentions the book by Justin Yap. It's called The Group, 7 Widowed Fathers Reimagine Life. So if you are a widowed dad or if you know a widowed dad, be sure to pick up that book, definitely. I would say also, if you're a widowed mom, don't think that it's only for dads. There's a ton of great information in there. Will shares with us here this concept of the good enough parent. So have a listen to Will Owens.
If you listen to Justin's podcast or if you read the book, there's a concept that they talk about called the good enough parent, which is basically, and I don't want to steal his thunder for those that haven't listened to it, but the gist of it is that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be good enough. If you're there for your child or your children, if you're there emotionally for them, showing them that you're emotionally available for them, then you've got this. You can do it. And probably even more importantly, one of the things that I've learned is you have to trust your gut. You know yourself, your child or your children. If something doesn't feel right, if you don't feel like you should put them into this particular situation, whether it's a social setting or an event, then don't do it. Don't put yourself in that situation. Don't put your child in that particular situation. Or, it's okay to say no to certain events and so forth. And so I'd highly recommend doing that. But you have to balance it with, you do have to kind of push your comfort level a little bit and put yourself out there because it's vulnerable. You're vulnerable and you have to, from what I've seen, until you push yourself, you're not going to test those limits a little bit and become more confident in your own self until you start doing that.
Okay, next up we have a clip that is short and sweet. Really terrific interview. Maybe one of my favorite interviews to date with Elan Thompson in Scotland. Lovely woman. She is a widowed parent and she has written several children's books. You'll want to be sure to listen to her TEDx talk. And if you go to the show notes for episode 68, you can see her TEDx and listen to our whole discussion. It's really worth it. I've just put in a very short clip here. When I asked her if she could say one thing to widowed parents, she had one absolutely important thing to say. Also, if you have younger kids or if you know younger kids who are grieving, she has 2 books. One is called Is Daddy Coming Back in a Minute? And the other is called What Happened to Daddy's Body? And these are 2 books that she wrote based on the questions of her son, who was very young at the time. And she actually has a 3rd book out, a brand new book. Those first 2 are related to grief and death. And the 3rd one is about cancer and explaining cancer of a parent to young kids. Elke herself, after her husband died, got breast cancer when her children were also still very young. And she gives us this book about how she explained and the types of questions her kids had and how she talked with her kids about her cancer. So do check all of that out. And again, like I said, be sure and listen to episode 68 because it was such a great discussion. Okay, here's Elan Thompson.
I think I would say, if your child is old enough to ask a question, they're old enough to hear an answer and, protect them with the best version of the truth.
Okay, next up we have Leslie Gray Streeter. Leslie was my guest in episode 58. We had such a terrific discussion. Leslie's the author of Black Widow. It's a memoir. Terrific subtitle. The subtitle is A Sad, Funny Journey Through Grief for People Who Normally Avoid Books with Words Like Journey in the title. And so her book was definitely sad. Her book was definitely funny. So I encourage you to check that out. So listen for Leslie in this next clip. She talks about all that advice that we sometimes get, very often well-meaning, but still sometimes can be difficult to deal with. So here is Leslie Gray Streeter.
It is okay to ask for help. If help is available, it is okay to ask for help. It is also okay to tell people that you're not the parent that they are and you don't have to do what they are suggesting. I think that when people, I know from my experience that 99% of the advice that I got was completely, absolutely 100% well-meaning and came from a place from those people of wanting to help me. But there was also a sense of, without them realizing it, frustrated that I wouldn't take their advice because then it became personal. to them, like, well, why don't you do what I told you to? It's like, because I'm 44 years old and I don't have to. Or, I mean, it happens when you become a parent anyway. People are telling you, don't use cloth, use cloth diapers, don't use cloth diapers, public schools, homeschool, whatever. There's all these advice people have. So this happens too, particularly in a traumatic situation where people just want you sorted out, not just because it's convenient, but because they really love you and they want to help you. But I would say to parents, really, if you need help, and I needed help, accept help. I had people cleaning my house and buying me towels and stuff. I didn't have towels, and I knew people were going to be coming to my house, and I only had like 4 clean towels. They're like, buy her some towels, and look at those people coming. So accept help, but also be willing to, when you are strong enough to say, I really appreciate it, but I'm going to do whatever this is, because it's on you now. And it's trial by fire. And if you have to kind of, you're where the buck stops always as a parent, particularly when you're now a widowed parent, and you don't owe anybody else your politeness. You don't owe anybody else. If you don't want to go talk to people, you don't have to. If you don't want people in your house, you don't have to have people in your house. If you don't want, hey, is it okay that I told so-and-so you were in town? No, it's not okay. Please stop. And the parade of the thing, you know what I mean? It's okay to learn who you are now and to tell other people who you are and to have them respect that.
Okay, next up we have Gary Ireland, another one of our widowed dads. Gary has older teenagers, so have a listen to my full discussion with him in episode 78. Lots of great reflections in there, including he talks about his family's experience with Gilda's Club NYC, which provides cancer support. And there are Gilda's Club groups and related groups in other cities as well, so it's not just for those of you in New York City. He also talks about an interesting project that his family has been working on for many years and carrying on his wife's legacy, and that is their advocacy for the full inclusion of girls in the Boy Scouts of America. So have a listen to this clip from Gary Ireland. I always ask my guests if you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
Be gentle, and I can't just leave it at that.
Okay.
But I talked about it before. Find the best in the person that has moved on, and really pay tribute to that. We were in a really good place, and I feel so fortunate, and as I said, grateful and filled with joy. But even if it was a different place, find the best in that person and carry that forward.
Okay, next up we have Maria Quabon Whitesell. I interviewed Maria in episode 78 along with Lauren Schneider from Our House Grief Support in Los Angeles, and their book is called You Can't Do It Alone, and it's Maria's memoir about her husband's experience with glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive form of brain cancer that my husband also died of. And Lauren joins her in the book to provide professional expertise on the childhood grief aspect of the story and their experience. So, terrific book. Check it out and have a listen next to some encouraging words from Maria Quabon Whitesell. And Maria, what would you say to widowed parents and newly widowed parents?
I guess I would say that you're stronger than you think you are. And when you think that you couldn't possibly face another hurdle or take any more pain, you're stronger than you are. And with your kids together, I think as long as you're honest with them and honest with yourself, and you surround yourself with the right village, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through it.
Okay, next up, my discussion with Pamela Addison. This was episode 93, and Pamela is the first person that I've interviewed who lost her husband to COVID-19. And she actually has started a Facebook group. It's called Young Widows and Widowers of COVID-19. So if that is your family's situation, be sure to look up that group and send a join request for that. Terrific peer support in that group, and I'm hearing that a lot of people feel less alone when they can connect with other people who have had similar losses in this pandemic time. So have a listen to this clip next from Pamela Addison.
As hard as it is, I know we're never going to fully heal from this traumatic experience, but I truly believe that it does get better, and it's going to take time. But where I was like almost 7 months ago to where I am now, I'm in such a better place. So even though it seems like your life has been thrown a curveball, I do truly believe that things will get better and we will heal as much as we can, but we're just going to move forward, and that's all we can do.
Okay, such great clips so far. I hope you've enjoyed listening to them, and I hope you will go back and check out these episodes. We're getting to our second to last clip here, and this is with another one of our widowed dads. This is Dennis Murphy. He was episode 75, was my discussion with him. He talked about a number of things, including the fact that at some point after he became widowed, he read that book, The Group, 7 Widowed Fathers Reimagine Life, that Will Owens mentioned in an earlier clip. And Dennis actually got so inspired after reading that he decided to start a group for widowed dads where he is in Des Moines. And he actually, in our interview, he very generously offered to help anyone else who's interested in starting a widowed dads group in their own location. And he shared his contact information if anybody wants to reach out with him. He talked about a number of other things, including deciding that he needed to change his approach to parenting and working to understand his kids better, and shared a funny story about putting his kids on the bus to the wrong school on his very first day as a widowed parent. So have a listen to this clip with Dennis Murphy. I'm noticing that we are almost out of time today. I think we could keep talking about this all day.
I could. Let's do it.
Well, let me just ask, kind of as a way of wrapping up, if you could say one thing to newly widowed dads, what would you say to them?
Man, you left the hardest question for the end.
Yeah.
It is a bumpy road. There's lots of, you've got good days, bad days. You've got good moments, bad moments. Luckily, I've got more good moments now than bad moments. You're kind of in the fight the first 6 months. You just don't know if you're going to make it. There's a lot of days where you just go home, you go to bed tired, you're exhausted, emotionally drained. I'm very fortunate. I come from a very loving family. I'm surrounded by faith believers that just kind of poured into me. And what I found is that even during my really darkest time and darkest moments, and just didn't think that I'd sit there and ask God, like, are you sure that I'm the best choice for these kids? And, it seemed like every single time something like that happened, there'd be somebody that would reach out and, offer us to make us food, or, just helping take the kids to school. And so I think really leveraging those resources, you have to kind of get over your pride. Like, I just remember being very proud, like, I'm not going to ask any help. I can do this myself. And, it's like, there's just lots of times you just have to say yes. Like, somebody wants to help, there's a reason they're asking. And it's not necessarily, even if it's not for you, it's probably for them. A lot of that's healing is for other people who are also grieving, and they just want to help. And so I finally, and I don't remember who, somebody told me, like, you just need to say yes more. Just say yes all the time. And just say yes, and don't be proud about accepting help and things like that. The other thing I would say is getting help. I did not get help right away for the kids. I didn't get help right away for myself. I did end up doing some counseling. I didn't do it right away. I should have. And the reason I say that is because, my situation, I thought I had gotten through all the stages of grief, and that wasn't the case. About the 1 year mark, I don't know, something about the finality of her death really just hit me. And, luckily, it was very hard. I had about 7 really, really hard months from, about the 1 year mark to about the 1.5 year mark. And luckily all those people I, kind of poured into this first year, and beyond that, were there for me. Family, friends, hope people. I was very fortunate that was the case. And, again, I had lots of folks telling me you need to kind of work through this grief, and everybody works through it differently. But leveraging those resources is really important, I think. And then last, I think just being very intentional. I mentioned before about one of the things I had done with the kids and understanding what their needs are. And obviously, maybe can't do that with younger kids, but I think you can do a version of that. Understanding that you're not dad anymore, you're mom, dad, or dad, mom. However you want to hyphenate that. And you got to change your approach to be effective, so that you don't get to the point where you're getting frustrated. And I think just being very intentional about what it is you want to do is important, while giving yourself a break. I think I made a mistake the first 9 months. I've got to do this exactly the way mom did it, because if I don't, they're gonna it's gonna mess everything up. And I think kind of giving yourself a break and understanding that it's okay. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to do everything exactly the same way. You have to modify your approach, and you have to modify kind of how you do things, so that you parent effectively going forward.
Okay, we've reached our very last clip today. As I like to say when I'm teeing up my last question, if you could say one thing to widowed parents, what would you say to them? I usually say, gosh, we're running out of time. And so it is, we're running out of time here today. For the last clip, I'd like to share with you these thoughts from Karen Millsap. I interviewed Karen back in episode 14. It's kind of funny to go back now and listen to some of the earlier episodes when I was just getting my feet wet as a podcast host. I was also so excited to have Karen back for episodes 45 and 46, and those were the special 1-year anniversary of the podcast episodes that I did, and I actually had Karen interview me on my own show for those 2 episodes, so check those out too if you haven't heard those. But as far as my discussion with Karen in episode 14, we had such a great discussion. Check the show notes. There's a link to her TED Talk. It's a terrific TED Talk called Use Your Tragedy to Change the World. And we talked about so many things, one of which I think is really important. After she spent the first year in a fog, she realized that she had the power of choice, and she had the power to decide that she was not going to let her life be destroyed by her husband's death. And she also realized that how she handled her husband's death would have a direct impact on her son's life and character. So let's close out today with these words from Karen Millsap. All right. Well, we're reaching the end of our time today. I just have one last question here. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would it be?
Take care of yourself and don't feel guilty about that. That's what I would say. And on the other side of that is don't give up, because you have a lot of people around here who are in the same boat as you, and they can help you. And if it's not talking to somebody, read something, listen to something. This podcast is phenomenal. I commend you for creating a resource for other widowed parents to be able to tap into some source of strength or encouragement, because it's a really, really dark time. But yeah, don't feel guilty about taking care of yourself. That's the very first thing you should do. And then just don't give up.
Don't give up. Wise words there from Karen Millsap. I do hope you enjoyed this special episode as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com and look for episode 100. So I always like to end the show with a few resources for listeners. So this week, first of all, for listeners in the U.S., I want to make sure you know about the COVID-19 Funeral Assistance Program. There's information available at FEMA.gov, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, I think. Anyway, FEMA.gov. I'll put a link directly to the program information in this week's email and blog post. But basically, they will support with up to $9,000 of direct funeral expenses, and it is not based on income, and you must apply by phone. So you can find the information online, but you'll need to call to apply. So if you have had a loved one die of COVID, make sure you check out that program and see if that might be of help to you. Secondly, I'd like to put a link, also in the show notes, to the searchable directory that the Dougy Center has. Dougy Center is in Portland, Oregon, but they are very much a national leader in the space of childhood grief, and they run grief programs for kids and families. And they have a brand new searchable directory where even if you are not in Oregon, wherever you are, you can put in your zip code and look for grief support near you, all across the U.S. And they have some locations information outside the U.S. as well. So do check that out. It's at dougy.org, DOUGY.org. And finally, a tool that you might not know about. It's really cool. It's called Grief Coach. And the website is actually grief.coach. And it is a text-based it's a text-based grief support program. It's terrific. It is a whole year of grief support. Normally $99. It's a subscription for a whole year of support. I do have a special code with them for $20 off. If you go to their website, grief.coach, and use the code Jenny Lisk, JENNYLISK, all one word, that will be $20 off. It's terrific. When you sign up, you get to say what type of loss you have and other information where they customize the messaging to your situation. And you can also have some of your support people who care about you, sign up as well to get helpful messages. So, again, grief.coach. And finally, if you haven't picked up my new book yet, Future Widow, check it out. Janet DeCristofaro from the Dougy Center wrote the foreword, and she said, quote, "This is one book you never want to have to read. It's also the book everyone should read." So I hope you'll check it out, futurewidowbook.com. You can find all the information, including whether you like to shop on Amazon or IndieBound or Kobo or other e-readers that may be popular wherever you are located. There are print books and ebooks, and you can find all the information and links at futurewidowbook.com. So coming up next time on the show, we have another very special episode. It is Ann Davidson and Pam Sheffield on options for parents with struggling teens. So this is a very important topic, and one that can be hard to get our hands around as widowed parents, as now the only parents of our teens. When kids are struggling, really struggling, sometimes it's hard to know what the options are. So we have a terrific deep dive on that coming up next time on the show. So as always, thank you for listening, and until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.